Arizona Territory, 1871. The merciless summer sun beat down on the cracked earth like a blacksmith's hammer, unforgiving and relentless. For 3 days, Darius Thornton had been stranded in this godforsaken stretch of desert after his horse had thrown a shoe and gone lame. His canteen hung nearly empty at his side, the water inside hot enough to scald. The young cowboy's face, normally handsome with its strong jaw and clear blue eyes, was now grimy with dust and lined with exhaustion. At 25, Darius had spent enough years on the frontier to know its cruelties intimately. He had watched good men die from snake bites, bad water, and outlaw bullets. He had buried friends in shallow graves and moved on because that was what survival demanded. His mother had died in childbirth, his father at the end of an Apache arrow when Darius was just 16. The wilderness had taught him one immutable truth: attachment was weakness, and weakness got you killed. "Out here, a man relies on nobody but himself," he muttered, adjusting his hat to block the sun's glare. His canteen sloshed with its final swallow of water, and his stomach growled in protest. 3 days since his last real meal, and the jerky had run out yesterday. Darius led his limping horse, a chestnut gelding named Copper, toward a distant smudge of green that promised water. His rifle was slung across his back, his Colt revolver at his hip, both as much a part of him as his own limbs. The loneliness of the trail no longer bothered him. He had learned to embrace the solitude, to find comfort in knowing that with no one to care about, there was no one to lose. What Darius wanted was simple enough: to deliver his horse to the blacksmith in Willow Creek, get back to the C. Barty ranch where he worked as a hand, and continue the predictable rhythm of his existence. What he needed, though he would have denied it fiercely, was something to fill the hollow space that had grown inside him, a void that not even the vastness of the Arizona Territory could match. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red, Darius spotted something unusual. A covered wagon sat askew near the tree line of the oasis he'd been making for, one wheel clearly broken. No smoke rose from a campfire, no horses were hitched nearby. Something was wrong. Drawing his revolver, Darius approached cautiously. Years on the frontier had taught him that trouble could wear many disguises, and an abandoned wagon was often a harbinger of death, either by Indian attack, outlaw raid, or disease. "Hello, the wagon," he called, his voice rough from thirst and disuse. "Anyone there?" A rustling sound came from inside, followed by a woman's voice, weak but determined. "Who's there?" "Name's Darius Thornton. I'm just a cowhand passing through. You all right in there, ma'am?" The canvas flap pushed aside, and Darius found himself staring into the most striking pair of green eyes he had ever seen. They belonged to a young woman, perhaps 21 or 22 years of age, with honey blonde hair that fell in loose waves past her shoulders. Her skin was pale, with a worrying flush of fever across her cheeks, and the blue calico dress she wore was wrinkled and stained with travel. "Thank God," she whispered, then promptly collapsed forward. Darius moved faster than thought, dropping his gun and lunging to catch her before she hit the ground. She fell limp into his arms, surprisingly light despite the cumbersome dress. Up close he could see that her breathing was shallow, her forehead burning with fever. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. "Water," she managed to say, "please." Without hesitation, Darius carried her to the shade of a cottonwood tree and propped her against the trunk. He took the last swallow from his canteen and held it to her lips. "Small sips," he instructed. "What's your name, miss?" "Marianne," she whispered after drinking. "Marianne Harper." "What happened to you, Miss Harper? Where's your family?" A shadow crossed her face. "Dead. Fever took Pa 2 days ago. Ma died in St. Louis before we ever started west." Her voice cracked. "I buried him myself." The words hit Darius like a physical blow. This slip of a girl had dug a grave in this hard-baked earth and laid her father to rest alone. Something stirred in his chest, respect, perhaps, or recognition of the same steel that had kept him alive all these years. "How long have you been sick?" "Not sure, day, maybe 2. She tried to sit up straighter and winced. "The wheel broke after I buried Pa. I've been trying to fix it, but—" She gestured weakly at her condition. Darius nodded. "You rest, I'll see to the wagon and find us some fresh water." As he turned to go, her hand caught his wrist with surprising strength. "Why are you helping me?" Her green eyes were direct, suspicious. "You don't know me." The question caught him off guard. Why was he helping her? Self-preservation dictated he should take what supplies he could and move on. A woman with fever was a liability, not an asset. "Because out here," he said finally, "sometimes all we've got is each other." The words surprised him as much as they did her. He quickly pulled away and busied himself with practical matters, finding the spring that fed the small oasis, refilling his canteen, leading both his lame horse and her abandoned mule to water. By the time he returned to check on Marianne, the sun had nearly set, and she had fallen into a fitful sleep. Darius built a small fire and boiled water for coffee, adding willow bark to make a tea that might help bring down her fever. He checked the wagon's contents: flour, beans, salt pork, ammunition, basic tools, a small trunk of clothing, and a Bible well worn with use. Enough to start somewhere new, not enough to suggest wealth that might attract attention. As night fell and the desert came alive with the sounds of creatures better suited to its harshness than humans, Darius sat beside the sleeping woman and considered his options. The nearest town was Willow Creek, a good 15 miles east. With a lame horse, a broken wagon wheel, and a feverish woman, it would be a difficult journey. "What have you gotten yourself into, Thornton?" he muttered, poking at the fire with a stick. Marianne stirred, her eyes opening to reflect the flickering flames. "You're still here," she said, sounding surprised. "Said I would be, didn't I?" Darius replied, handing her the tin cup of willow bark tea. "Drink this. It tastes like horse piss, but it'll help with the fever." A small, unexpected smile curved her lips. "Such language in front of a lady, Mr. Thornton." "Apologies, Miss Harper. Been a while since I've had cause to mind my manners." She sipped the tea and grimaced. "You weren't exaggerating about the taste." "Never do," he said, allowing himself a small smile in return. "How'd you end up out here alone?" Marianne's face grew somber. Pa was a schoolteacher in St. Louis. After Ma died of consumption last winter, he couldn't bear to stay. Said we needed a fresh start, somewhere new where the air was clean and dry. She gestured at the desert around them. He bought land sight unseen near Tucson, said we'd start a new school there. "Long way to go on your own now," Darius observed, careful to keep his tone neutral. "I don't have anywhere to go back to," she said simply. "Forward is my only choice." Darius nodded, understanding the sentiment all too well. "Get some rest, Miss Harper. We've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow." Morning brought clarity and decisions. Darius rose before dawn and set to work on the wagon wheel. The hub was cracked beyond repair, but with some ingenuity and the tools from Marianne's wagon, he managed to fashion a temporary fix that might hold until they reached town. Marianne's fever had broken overnight, leaving her weak but clear-headed. He found her attempting to comb her tangled blonde hair with her fingers when he returned from hunting a jackrabbit for breakfast. "You look better," he said, dropping the rabbit nearby and reaching for his knife. "I feel better," she agreed, watching him skin the animal with efficient movements. "Thank you for the tea." "And for staying." Darius shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "We should reach Willow Creek by nightfall if we start soon. The blacksmith there can properly fix your wheel, and there's a doctor if you need one." "And then?" she asked quietly. The question hung between them. And then what? He had no obligation to this woman beyond basic human decency. His job was waiting at the C-Bar-T, and she had her own destination. "And then you head to Tucson, I reckon," he said, focusing on preparing the rabbit. "Start that school your pa wanted." "Yes," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I suppose I will." They ate in silence, the desert awakening around them with the rising sun. Darius hitched his lame horse to the wagon alongside her mule, redistributing the weight to spare his horse's injured hoof. Marianne insisted on sitting up front with him rather than resting in the wagon bed, claiming the fresh air would do her good. As they set out across the unforgiving landscape, Darius found himself stealing glances at his companion. In the morning light, with her hair tucked beneath a sensible bonnet and her hands folded primly in her lap, Marianne Harper looked every inch the proper schoolteacher's daughter. But there was something else there too, a quiet determination in the set of her jaw, a resilience that the frontier demanded of those who wished to survive it. "Have you been a cowboy long, Mr. Thornton?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Since I was 17, he replied. "Started as a wrangler, worked my way up to full hand." "And your family?" "Don't have any." The words came out sharper than he intended. "Not anymore." Marianne nodded, not pressing further. "I'm sorry." "Don't be, it was a long time ago." They fell into silence again, but something about it felt different, less like two strangers thrown together by circumstance and more like two people finding a shared rhythm. The wagon creaked over the hard ground, the temporary wheel holding better than Darius had expected. Around midday, they crossed paths with a group of Apache hunters. Darius tensed, his hand moving to his rifle, but the Indians merely watched them pass, neither friendly nor hostile. Marianne's knuckles went white where she gripped the seat, but she didn't cry out or panic as many Eastern women might have. "You're calmer than most when it comes to Indians," Darius observed once they were past. "Pa taught me that people are people regardless of their race," she said, though I admit my heart was racing something fierce. "You hide it well," he said, impressed despite himself. "That's good. Out here, showing fear can get you killed faster than anything." "Is that why you never show any?" she asked, those green eyes studying him with uncomfortable perception. Darius adjusted his hat, buying time. "What makes you think I don't feel fear?" "Oh, I didn't say you don't feel it, I said you don't show it, there's a difference," she smiled softly. "Your eyes give you away, though. They get very still like a frozen pond when you're worried." The observation unsettled him. People didn't notice things about Darius Thornton, he made sure of that. He kept people at a distance, interactions brief and impersonal. It was safer that way. "You should rest," he said, changing the subject. "We've still got a ways to go." But Marianne Harper wasn't so easily deterred. "Why did you really help me, Mr. Thornton? And don't say it's because out here, sometimes all we've got is each other. That may be true, but it's not why you stopped." Darius kept his eyes on the horizon. "Maybe I just couldn't leave a woman to die in the desert." "Maybe," she agreed, "or maybe you recognize something in me that you know in yourself." "And what might that be, Miss Harper?" "Loneliness," she said simply. The word landed like a physical blow. Darius flicked the reins, urging the animals to a slightly faster pace, as if he could outrun the truth of her statement. "We'll be in Willow Creek before sundown," he said, his voice rough. "You should rest while you can." This time Marianne allowed the conversation to end, settling back against the wagon seat and closing her eyes. But the damage was done. She had seen through the careful walls he had built, identified the hollow space he worked so hard to ignore. The afternoon stretched on, the heat building to an oppressive weight before beginning its gradual descent. The temporary wheel creaked ominously at times but held. Darius found himself hyper-aware of the woman beside him, the subtle floral scent that somehow persisted despite days in the wilderness, the way she hummed softly to herself when she thought he wasn't listening, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she dozed. It was dangerous, this awareness. Attachment was weakness, and weakness got you killed. He repeated the mantra silently, trying to rebuild the mental fortifications that Marianne Harper had somehow breached with nothing more than green eyes and a simple observation. The sun was setting when they finally caught sight of Willow Creek. It wasn't much of a town, a main street with a general store, saloon, blacksmith, small hotel, and assorted other buildings necessary for frontier existence. But after days in the desert, it looked like paradise. "We made it," Marianne said, sitting up straighter and adjusting her bonnet. Despite her illness and the rigors of travel, she managed to look remarkably composed. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Thornton." "No need," he said gruffly. "Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," she replied, her hand briefly touching his arm. "You're a good man, Darius Thornton. Whether you believe it or not." The use of his first name, spoken with such warm conviction, did something strange to Darius's chest, a tightness that wasn't entirely unpleasant. He guided the wagon toward the blacksmith's forge, pushing the feeling aside. Soon he would deliver Marianne Harper safely to civilization, get his horse reshod, and be on his way. This unexpected interlude would become nothing more than a memory, fading with time like all the rest. But the frontier, as Darius well knew, rarely cooperated with a man's plans. The blacksmith, a burly man named Ferguson, confirmed what Darius already suspected: his horse needed at least 3 days off that hoof before it could be reshod and ridden again. The wagon wheel would take 2 days to repair properly. Which meant Darius was stuck in Willow Creek far longer than he had anticipated. "The hotel's clean enough," Ferguson told them as darkness fell. "Mrs. Wilson, who runs it, is particular about bedbugs, which is more than can be said for most places out here." Darius thanked him and escorted Marianne to the small hotel at the end of the street. The lobby was simple but, as promised, clean, with a faded floral wallpaper and a desk where a stern-looking older woman sat knitting. "Mrs. Wilson, we need 2 rooms, please," Darius said, reaching for his wallet. The woman looked up, her sharp eyes taking in Marianne's disheveled appearance and Darius's trail-worn clothes. "Only got 1 room available with the cattle buyers in town," she said. "Room 3, upstairs." 2 beds, though. Darius hesitated, aware of the impropriety of sharing a room with an unmarried woman, even with separate beds. Is there nowhere else in town, perhaps a boarding house? Not unless you fancy sleeping above the saloon with the working girls, Mrs. Wilson replied dryly, "It's 1 room or nothing, Mr. Thornton, and this is Miss Harper." Mrs. Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly. Not married then. "No, ma'am," Marian said, stepping forward. "Mr. Thornton rescued me when my wagon broke down in the desert. My father died recently, and I'm traveling to Tucson." Something in Mrs. Wilson's face softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, child. But I still only have the 1 room." "I can sleep in the stables," Darius offered. "Nonsense," Marian said firmly. "We can share the room, we're both adults, and after what we've been through, I trust Mr. Thornton completely." She turned to Mrs. Wilson. "Don't you have a screen or something that could be placed between the beds for privacy?" Mrs. Wilson considered this, then nodded. "I have a folding screen I use for washing day." "That would be proper enough, I suppose." She named a price that was fair for the room, and Darius paid it despite Marian's protests that she should cover her own costs. "You can repay me once you're settled in Tucson," he said as they climbed the narrow stairs to their room. "Teaching pays well enough, doesn't it?" Marian laughed, a surprisingly melodic sound that echoed in the quiet hallway. "Hardly, but I'll find a way to repay your kindness, Mr. Thornton. I always settle my debts." Room 3 was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. True to her word, Mrs. Wilson sent up a folding screen that effectively divided the room in half, along with a pitcher of hot water and 2 towels. "I'll give you privacy to wash up," Darius said, heading for the door. "I need to check on the horses anyway." "Thank you," Marian said softly, "for everything." Darius nodded and left quickly, uncomfortable with the warmth in her voice. He spent longer than necessary at the livery stable, checking his horse's injured hoof and making arrangements for the blacksmith to begin repairs on the wagon wheel first thing in the morning. By the time he returned to the hotel, he hoped Marian would be asleep. Instead, he found her sitting by the window in a simple white nightgown, her damp hair hanging loose down her back as she brushed it with long, methodical strokes. The lamplight cast a golden glow over the scene, and for a moment Darius forgot to breathe. She turned at the sound of the door and a blush rose to her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I thought you'd be longer." "No, I'm sorry," he said, averting his eyes. "I should have knocked." "It's your room too," she pointed out reasonably, setting down the brush. "And I'm decent enough, just not dressed for company." Darius cleared his throat. I'll just wash up and turn in." "Long day tomorrow." Marian nodded and retreated behind the screen, while Darius quickly washed the trail dust from his face and hands. He removed his boots, gun belt, and outer shirt, but kept his trousers on despite the discomfort of sleeping fully clothed. "Good night, Mr. Thornton," came Marian's voice from behind the screen. "Good night, Miss Harper," he replied, blowing out the lamp and plunging the room into darkness. Sleep, however, proved elusive. Darius lay awake, acutely aware of the soft sounds of Marian's breathing on the other side of the screen. It had been years since he'd shared such close quarters with anyone, let alone a woman. The intimacy of it, however innocent, unsettled him. Just as he was finally drifting off, Marian's voice came softly through the darkness. "Darius, are you awake?" The use of his first name again sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. "Yes," he answered cautiously, "I was just wondering." "What will you do after your horse is healed? Go back to your ranch?" "It's not my ranch," he corrected her. "I just work there, but yes, that's the plan." There was a rustling sound as she shifted in her bed. "Do you ever get tired of it? The moving around, the loneliness?" Darius stared up at the dark ceiling. "It's just the way things are." "But it doesn't have to be," she said, her voice taking on a wistful quality. "Pa used to say we make our own fate. That we choose our path, even out here. With all due respect to your father, Miss Harper, sometimes the path chooses us." "Marian," she said, "if I'm calling you Darius, you should call me Marian." The familiarity should have alarmed him, but instead, Darius found himself smiling slightly in the darkness. "All right, Marian, but my point stands. Some of us aren't meant for settling down." "Everyone needs somewhere to belong," she insisted. "Someone to belong to." "That kind of thinking gets people hurt," he said, more sharply than he intended. "Out here, the only person you can count on is yourself." The silence that followed his outburst was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Marianne's voice came again, softer this time. I'm sorry someone hurt you badly enough to make you believe that. Before Darius could respond, she continued, Good night, Darius, I hope you sleep well. The conversation left him more unsettled than ever. How had this woman he'd known for barely 2 days managed to see so clearly the wounds he thought long scarred over? And more disturbing still, why did he feel a strange comfort in being seen? Morning brought no clarity, only the awkwardness of two people who had shared thoughts in darkness now facing each other in the harsh light of day. Marianne was already dressed when Darius awoke, her honey-blonde hair neatly arranged beneath a bonnet, wearing a clean dress of soft blue cotton. Mrs. Wilson directed me to the bathhouse behind the hotel, she explained. You should go too, while the water's still hot. Darius nodded, gathering his spare shirt from his saddlebag. I'll check on the wagon after. Ferguson said it would take 2 days at least. And your horse needs 3, she reminded him, which means we have time to rest and recuperate. Her eyes sparkled with something like mischief. Perhaps you could show me around Willow Creek. I've never seen a proper western town before. There's not much to see, Darius warned. General store, saloon, church on Sundays. Then it won't take long, will it? She smiled, and something in Darius's chest tightened again. After a proper bath, his first in weeks, and a decent breakfast at the hotel, Darius found himself playing tour guide to Marianne Harper. Her curiosity about everything from the merchandise in the general store to the wanted posters outside the sheriff's office was both endearing and refreshing. She looked at the frontier not with fear or disdain, but with genuine interest. What about that building? She asked, pointing to a small structure at the edge of town. Schoolhouse, Darius said. Though from the looks of it, they haven't had a teacher in some time. Marianne's eyes lit up. Could we look inside? Before Darius could object, she was already heading toward the building with purposeful strides. He followed, shaking his head at her enthusiasm. The door was unlocked. Few things weren't in a town this small, and they stepped into a single room with rows of desks facing a larger desk at the front. Dust covered everything, and cobwebs adorned the corners. It's perfect, Marianne breathed, running her fingertips over the teacher's desk. Perfect for what? Darius asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. For teaching, she said simply. This town needs a school as much as Tucson does. Maybe more. Darius frowned. You're not thinking of staying here. Marianne turned to face him, her green eyes serious. Why not? I have no connections in Tucson, no one expecting me, but here, she gestured around the room. Here I could make a difference right away. You don't know anyone here either, Darius pointed out, and winter's coming, it gets harsh out here. I know you, she said softly. The words hung between them, laden with meaning Darius wasn't ready to acknowledge. He looked away, focusing on a faded map of the United States that hung crookedly on the wall. You don't know me, he said finally. Not really. I know enough, Marianne replied. I know you're a good man who risked his own safety to help a stranger. I know you're gentle with horses and respect the land. I know you've been hurt and that you're afraid to let anyone close again. She took a step toward him. And I know that when you look at me, your eyes aren't so frozen anymore. Darius felt cornered, exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical vulnerability. This woman had somehow slipped past defenses he'd spent years building, and it terrified him more than any gun-toting outlaw ever could. I should check on the wagon, he said abruptly, heading for the door. Ferguson might need specific instructions. He felt Marianne's eyes on his back as he fled, but she didn't call after him or try to stop him. Somehow, that made it worse. The blacksmith was working on the wagon wheel when Darius arrived, his massive arms handling the heavy tools with practiced ease. Should be done by tomorrow afternoon, Ferguson reported. Your horse, though, still needs another day after that. That hoof's in bad shape. Darius nodded, relieved to focus on practical matters. I appreciate the work. What do I owe you? They haggled briefly over the price, settling on a fair amount that would stretch Darius's funds but not break him. As he turned to leave, Ferguson called after him. That's a mighty fine young lady you brought to town. Mrs. Wilson's been talking her up as a potential schoolteacher. News traveled fast in small towns. Darius shrugged noncommittally. She's got her heart set on Tucson. Ferguson raised an eyebrow. That's so. Seems to me she was mighty interested in our schoolhouse. Sheriff saw her cleaning the place up not an hour ago. Darius frowned. Cleaning? Borrowed a broom from Mrs. Wilson and got to work, said something about seeing its potential. Ferguson chuckled. Town council would hire her in a heartbeat. Been trying to get a teacher out here for months. Darius thanked him for the information and headed back toward the hotel, his thoughts in turmoil. What was Marianne playing at? She couldn't seriously be considering staying in Willow Creek. It was one thing to dream about teaching in a frontier town from the safety of St. Louis, but quite another to actually do it, alone, with winter approaching, in a place where she knew no one. Except him. And he would be leaving as soon as his horse was ready. The thought brought an unexpected pang. 3 days ago, he couldn't wait to get back to the CBRT and the predictable rhythm of ranch life. Now the idea of riding away and leaving Marianne Harper behind felt somehow wrong. He found her exactly where Ferguson had said, in the schoolhouse now transformed. The dust was gone, the floors swept, the desks arranged in neat rows. She was washing the windows when he arrived, her sleeves rolled up and a determined set to her jaw. "You've been busy," he said from the doorway. Marianne turned, a smile lighting her face. "Darius." "Yes, I thought I might as well make myself useful while we wait for the repairs. Ferguson says the wheel will be done tomorrow, but my horse needs another day after that." He stepped into the room, noting the improvements. "You did all this yourself." "Mrs. Wilson helped a little," she admitted. "And she introduced me to some of the town council members who stopped by. They're very interested in reopening the school." Darius leaned against one of the student desks. "And you're very interested in being their teacher." "I'm considering it," she said carefully. It would be a chance to honor Pa's memory, to fulfill his dream in a way. "It's not safe," Darius argued. "A woman alone in a frontier town." "I wouldn't be alone," Marianne countered. "There's a community here. Mrs. Wilson has already offered me a permanent room at the hotel at a reduced rate in exchange for helping with the bookkeeping." Darius ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "You've known these people for less than a day." "Sometimes you just know when something's right," she said, putting down her rag and approaching him. Like when a stranded cowboy decides to help a sick woman in the desert instead of riding on. Her proximity was unsettling, the scent of soap and something uniquely Marianne filling his senses. Darius took a step back, maintaining distance. "That was different," he insisted. "Was it?" She tilted her head, studying him. "Or was it the same instinct I'm following now, the one that says, this is where I'm meant to be?" Before Darius could formulate a response, the door opened behind them. A man in his 40s with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest stepped in, his expression friendly but assessing. "Miss Harper, I'm Sheriff Thomas Gray. Heard you might be our new schoolteacher." Marianne extended her hand, smiling warmly. "I'm considering it, Sheriff. The town seems lovely." "We're small but growing," Gray said, shaking her hand before turning to Darius. "And you must be the young man who brought Miss Harper to us. Thornton, is it?" "Yes, sir, Darius Thornton," he straightened, noting the calculating look in the sheriff's eyes. "Work for the CBRT, I hear," Gray continued. "Good outfit. Mason Colton runs a tight ship." "That he does," Darius agreed. "I should be heading back there soon as my horse is fit to ride." Something flickered across Marianne's face, disappointment perhaps, but she quickly masked it. "Mr. Thornton was kind enough to help me when my wagon broke down after my father passed away." Sheriff Gray's expression sobered. "My condolences, Miss Harper. Losing family is never easy, especially out here." He glanced between them. "Well, I just wanted to introduce myself and let you know the town council's mighty interested in your proposition. We've got about 15 children of schooling age, and more in the outlying farms." "I'd be happy to meet with the council formally," Marianne said. "Tomorrow evening at the church," Gray said with a nod. 6 o'clock. After the sheriff left, an awkward silence fell between them. Darius felt as though events were moving too quickly, spinning beyond his control. 3 days ago, he'd been a solitary cowboy with simple needs and clear expectations. Now he found himself entangled in the future of a woman he barely knew, but who somehow felt more familiar than people he'd worked alongside for years. "You don't have to decide right away," he said finally. "Tucson might still be the better option." Marianne sighed, returning to her window washing. "Why does it bother you so much that I might stay here?" The question caught him off guard. "It doesn't bother me," he said automatically. "Clearly it does," she countered, not looking at him. "Is it because you feel responsible for me, or is it because you're afraid I might ask you to stay too?" The direct question hit too close to home. Darius felt heat rise to his face, anger and something else he couldn't name battling for dominance. I have a job, commitments. I can't just. I'm not asking you to stay, Marianne interrupted, finally turning to face him. Her expression was composed, but her eyes betrayed her hurt. I would never ask someone to change their life for me, I just thought. I don't know what I thought. The defeat in her voice made something twist painfully in Darius's chest. Without thinking, he crossed the distance between them and took her hands in his. They were rough from her cleaning efforts, a stark contrast to what he imagined a schoolteacher's hands should feel like. You deserve better than a dusty little town in the middle of nowhere, he said softly. Maybe I don't want better, she replied, looking up at him with those clear green eyes. Maybe I just want real, something true. For a moment they stood frozen in possibility, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Then a child's laughter outside the window broke the spell, and Darius dropped her hands as if they'd burned him. I should let you finish here, he said, retreating toward the door. I promised Ferguson I'd help him with the wheel in exchange for a reduced price. Marianne nodded, that same composed mask falling over her features. Of course, I'll see you at dinner, perhaps. But Darius didn't return for dinner. He spent the afternoon helping Ferguson with the wagon wheel, then accepted an invitation to play cards at the saloon. He drank just enough whiskey to blur the edges of his thoughts, but not enough to dull his survival instincts. When he finally returned to the hotel room well after midnight, he was relieved to find Marianne apparently asleep behind the screen. He removed his boots and gun belt as quietly as possible and lay down on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Just 2 more days, he told himself. 2 days, and then he could ride away from Willow Creek and the confusing feelings that Marianne Harper stirred within him. Back to the life he understood, the solitude that kept him safe. But even as he thought it, Darius knew something had changed. The comfortable isolation he'd cultivated for years now felt hollow, like a poor substitute for something genuine. And the prospect of returning to it left a bitter taste in his mouth that had nothing to do with cheap whiskey. Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains and rousing Darius from a fitful sleep. He sat up, rubbing his face, and noticed immediately that Marianne's bed was empty, the screen folded away. A note sat on the washstand, his name written in elegant handwriting. Gone to breakfast with Mrs. Wilson and the school board. Meeting at 6 p.m. tonight, don't wait up, M. The brevity of the note stung more than it should have. Darius crumpled it in his fist, angry at himself for caring, angry at Marianne for making him care. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs, where Mrs. Wilson gave him a disapproving look over her spectacles. Your friend's made quite an impression, she said as she poured him coffee. Half the town's ready to offer her a contract on the spot. Other half will be convinced after tonight's meeting. She's smart, Darius said neutrally. She'll do well wherever she ends up. Mrs. Wilson's eyes narrowed. Young man, are you really so blind? That girl's smitten with you, clear as day. The coffee cup halted halfway to Darius's mouth. Beg your pardon. You heard me, the older woman said bluntly. She talks about you like you hung the moon. Darius is so brave, Darius is so resourceful. It would be sickening if it wasn't so sweet. Darius set the cup down carefully. Mrs. Wilson, with all due respect, you're mistaken. Miss Harper and I barely know each other. The hotel keeper snorted. Sometimes that's all it takes. My Harold proposed after knowing me 3 days, and we had 47 good years together before the consumption took him. Her expression softened. Don't be a fool, boy. Good women are rare as gold out here, and twice as valuable. Before Darius could formulate a response, the door opened and Marianne herself entered, accompanied by an older gentleman in a suit that had seen better days. She was laughing at something he said, her face animated in a way that made Darius's chest tighten. Oh, she said, spotting him, good morning, Mr. Thornton. The formality was like a slap after the intimacy of their previous conversations. Darius nodded stiffly. Miss Harper, I trust your meeting went well. Very well, thank you, she replied, her tone polite but distant. Mr. Peterson here is the head of the school board, Mr. Peterson, this is Darius Thornton, the gentleman who helped me reach Willow Creek. Peterson extended a hand which Darius shook automatically. We're much obliged to you, son. Miss Harper is exactly what this town needs. A proper educated lady to teach our young uns. She's very capable, Darius agreed, noticing the flush that rose to Marianne's cheeks at the praise. I should finish preparing for tonight's presentation, she said, avoiding Darius's eyes. If you'll excuse me, gentlemen. She hurried upstairs, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. Peterson cleared his throat. Fine young lady, shame about her father, but our gain, I suppose. Will you be attending the meeting tonight, Mr. Thornton? I haven't decided, Darius said, though in truth, he'd already resolved to be as far from that church as possible at 6 o'clock. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Darius busied himself helping Ferguson finish the wagon wheel, then checked on his horse, whose hoof was healing nicely but still needed another day of rest. He avoided the hotel and, by extension, Marianne, taking his midday meal at the saloon instead. As evening approached, he found himself restless, pacing the small stable where his horse was boarded. The meeting would be starting soon. Marianne would charm the town council with her intelligence and determination, just as she had charmed him. They would offer her the position and she would accept, and tomorrow or the next day he would ride away, leaving her behind to start her new life. It was what she wanted, it was what was best for both of them. Attachments were dangerous, especially out here. Caring for someone meant having something to lose, and Darius Thornton had lost enough in his 25 years to last several lifetimes. So why did the thought of leaving make him feel as though something essential was being torn from his chest? The church bell rang 6 times, its clear tone carrying across the small town. Darius closed his eyes, picturing Marianne standing before the town council, her honey-blonde hair neatly arranged, her green eyes bright with purpose. She would be nervous but determined, just as she had been when she buried her father alone in the desert. That image of Marianne kneeling beside a fresh grave, alone in her grief and courage, was what finally broke his resolve. Before he could second-guess himself, Darius was striding toward the church, his long legs eating up the distance. He slipped in through the back door just as Marianne was beginning to speak. The small church was full, with what seemed like the entire town turned out to hear the prospective new schoolteacher. She stood at the pulpit, a vision in blue, her voice clear and confident as she outlined her teaching philosophy and experience. Education is not merely about reading and figures, she was saying. It's about preparing children for the world they will inherit. Out here, that world demands practicality alongside knowledge. I believe in teaching not just from books, but from experience. Darius leaned against the back wall, watching as she captivated her audience. There was something magical about the transformation from the feverish, vulnerable woman he'd found in the wagon to this poised, articulate teacher, commanding respect from hardened frontier folk. I know I'm young, she continued, and I know some of you may have concerns about my ability to handle the challenges of teaching in a frontier town. But I was raised by a man who believed education was worth any sacrifice. My father died bringing me west to start a school. I intend to honor his memory by doing exactly that, if not in Tucson, then here in Willow Creek, where I've been shown such kindness. Her eyes scanned the crowd and locked with Darius's. For a moment, surprise registered on her face, followed by something warmer that made his heart race. Then she looked away, continuing her presentation without missing a beat. The question and answer session that followed revealed Marianne's quick wit and genuine passion for teaching. She fielded inquiries about curriculum, discipline, and even the propriety of a young unmarried woman living alone with charm and intelligence. By the time the formal meeting concluded, it was clear the position was hers if she wanted it. As the townspeople gathered around to congratulate her, Darius remained at the back of the church, uncertain of his place in this moment of triumph. He watched as Marianne accepted handshakes and well wishes with grace, her smile genuine but somehow not reaching her eyes completely. Finally, as the crowd began to disperse, she made her way toward him. In the lamplight she looked both younger and older than her years, innocent yet weathered by recent hardship. "You came," she said simply. Darius nodded. "You were impressive." "Thank you," she glanced around at the now-empty church. "They've offered me the position, $25 a month plus room and board at Mrs. Wilson's, not a fortune but enough to live on." "Are you going to accept?" Marianne hesitated, searching his face. "I wanted to talk to you first. Your horse will be ready tomorrow and then you'll be leaving." "Yes," Darius confirmed, though the word felt like a lie even as he spoke it. "I need to know something," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "These past few days, have they meant anything to you, or am I just a responsibility you'll be glad to be rid of?" The raw vulnerability in her question cut through Darius's carefully constructed defenses. He took a step toward her, then stopped, afraid of what might happen if he got too close. You were never just a responsibility, he said finally, but what you're asking. I don't know how to give you an answer that makes sense. Try, she urged, please. Darius ran a hand through his hair, searching for words to explain the storm of emotions she had awakened in him. For 8 years I've lived by one rule: don't get attached. Attachment is weakness, and weakness gets you killed. I've watched friends die because they hesitated to save someone they cared about. I've seen good men destroyed by grief when they lost people they loved. He paced a few steps, trying to organize his thoughts. Then I found you half dead in that wagon and something shifted. I should have helped you and moved on. That would have been safer, smarter. He looked at her directly, but I couldn't, and now I don't know what that means or what to do about it. Marianne closed the distance between them, her green eyes luminous in the dim light. It means you're human, Darius. It means despite everything you've lost, despite all your efforts to prevent it, you still have the capacity to care. To connect. That's not weakness, it's the greatest strength there is. She reached up, her hand hovering near his face as if afraid to touch him. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm not asking for promises you can't keep. I'm just asking you to acknowledge what's happening between us, whatever it might be. Darius caught her hand before it could retreat, holding it against his cheek. Her palm was warm, slightly calloused from her recent cleaning efforts, and the contact sent a jolt through him like nothing he'd ever felt. I don't know what this is, he admitted quietly, but it terrifies me more than any gun I've ever faced. A small smile curved Marianne's lips. Me too. The honesty of that simple confession broke something loose in Darius's chest. Without consciously deciding to, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he expected her to pull away. But Marianne responded with a sweet eagerness that made his head spin, her hands coming up to rest lightly on his chest. Darius cupped her face, marveling at the softness of her skin beneath his rough fingers, deepening the kiss until they were both breathless. When they finally parted, Marianne's eyes remained closed for a moment, her lips slightly parted. Darius watched her expression, memorizing every detail, the fan of her eyelashes against her cheeks, the delicate flush that had risen to her skin, the slight tremble of her mouth. So, she whispered, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. Not just a responsibility, then. Darius let out a shaky laugh. No, definitely not. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with possibility. Finally, Marianne spoke. What happens now? It was the question Darius had been avoiding since the moment he found her in the desert. What happened now? The safe answer, the answer that aligned with everything he'd believed about survival on the frontier, was clear: nothing happened. He would ride away tomorrow, back to the Sea-Barty and the life he understood. She would stay in Willow Creek and build something new. They would become memories to each other, nothing more. But standing here with the taste of her still on his lips and the warmth of her hand against his, that answer felt not just wrong but impossible. I don't know, he admitted. I'm due back at the ranch. And you've got a school to open. Disappointment flickered across her face, but she nodded. I understand, you have obligations, a life established elsewhere. But Darius continued, surprising himself, the Sea-Barty isn't going anywhere. And Mason Colton is a reasonable man. He might give me some time, if I had somewhere important to be. Hope dawned in Marianne's eyes. And do you have somewhere important to be? Darius took her hands in his, marveling at how natural it felt. I'm starting to think I might. The smile that bloomed across her face was like sunrise breaking over the desert, sudden, radiant, transforming everything it touched. How much time would you need to arrange things at the ranch? A week, maybe 2, Darius said, his mind already calculating the distance to the Sea-Barty and back. I'd need to collect my pay, gather my things, explain the situation to Mason. And what situation would that be exactly? Marianne asked, a teasing note entering her voice. Darius felt heat rise to his face. That I've met someone. Someone who makes me question everything I thought I knew about surviving out here. Her expression softened. 2 weeks then. The school doesn't start until the first Monday of next month anyway. She squeezed his hands. But Darius, I need you to be sure. I won't hold you to anything said in the heat of the moment. I'm not sure of much, he confessed, except that the thought of riding away from you tomorrow and never seeing you again feels like the worst kind of defeat. He paused, struggling to articulate feelings he'd spent years suppressing. I want to see where this leads. I want to know if there's something here worth building on. Marianne stood on tiptoe and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Then go make your arrangements, Cowboy, and come back to me when you're ready. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that made the harshness of the frontier seem like a distant concern. Darius's horse, pronounced fit to travel by Ferguson, stood saddled and ready outside the hotel. The repaired wagon waited nearby, its new wheel gleaming in the sunlight. Darius secured the last of his belongings to the saddle, acutely aware of Marianne watching from the hotel porch. She wore a simple brown dress, her honey-blonde hair braided and pinned up in a practical style that somehow only enhanced her beauty. Around them, the town was already stirring. Men heading to work, women sweeping porches, children racing toward the newly cleaned schoolhouse where an older girl had been enlisted to mind them until the official teacher took over. "You have everything you need?" Marianne asked as he approached her. "Water, provisions?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied with a small smile. "Enough to reach the Sea-Barty by nightfall tomorrow." She nodded, her hands twisting nervously in her skirt. "And you're sure Mason Colton won't object to you returning here?" "He might grumble a bit," Darius admitted, "but good hands are valuable out here. If I promise him a few months of work through the winter, he'll likely grant me the time now when things are slower." "And after those few months?" Marianne asked softly. It was the question that hung between them, the one neither had dared to voice directly. What came after? What were they building toward? Darius took her hands, stilling their nervous movement. "After those months, I thought I might see if Willow Creek has need of another permanent resident. Someone who knows horses, perhaps, or cattle." Hope bloomed in Marianne's eyes. "I hear they're a growing community. Such skills would be most welcome." "That's what I thought," Darius said, his heart racing with the implications of what he was suggesting. 2 weeks, 3 at the most, and then we can figure out the rest together." Marianne squeezed his hands, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'll be here, teaching my students and waiting for a certain cowboy to return." Darius wanted to kiss her, to draw her into his arms and forget about the journey ahead. But they were standing on the main street of Willow Creek in broad daylight, with Mrs. Wilson watching hawkishly from the hotel window and various townspeople passing by with curious glances. Instead, he lifted one of her hands to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. 2 weeks, he promised again. With a final smile, he mounted his horse and turned toward the eastern trail that would lead him to the Sea-Barty. As he reached the edge of town, Darius allowed himself one glance back. Marianne still stood on the porch, her hand raised in farewell, the morning sun catching in her hair and turning it to gold. For the first time in years, Darius Thornton rode away from a place with the full intention of returning. The thought should have terrified him, should have set off all the warning bells that had kept him alive and alone for so long. Instead, it filled him with a strange, unfamiliar sense of peace. The trail to the Sea-Barty wound through rocky passes and open rangeland, a journey Darius had made countless times before, but this time everything looked different. The harsh landscape that had always seemed a reflection of his own isolated existence now appeared full of life and possibility. He noticed things he had overlooked before, the delicate purple of wildflowers growing improbably from cracks in the rocks, the graceful soaring of hawks against the endless blue sky, the resilient beauty of life finding a way even in the most unforgiving conditions. By the time he reached the ranch late the following day, Darius had rehearsed his conversation with Mason Colton a dozen different ways. The Sea-Barty was one of the larger spreads in the territory, employing 15 hands year-round and more during roundup. Mason was fair but demanding, expecting loyalty and hard work from his men. Darius had been with him for 3 years, longer than he'd stayed anywhere since his father's death. The familiar buildings came into view as the sun began its descent. The main house with its proper wooden porch, the bunkhouse where Darius had slept for the past 3 years, the barn and corrals where the ranch's prized horses were kept. Smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney, and Darius's stomach growled at the thought of a proper meal after 2 days of jerky and hardtack. He was barely dismounted when a voice called out, "Well, look what the wind blew in." "We thought the coyotes got you, Thornton." Darius turned to see Jake Miller, one of the other hands, approaching with a broad grin. Jake was a few years older than Darius, with a weather-beaten face and perpetually sun-squinted eyes. "Takes more than coyotes to finish me off," Darius replied, returning the smile. It felt strange on his face, this easy camaraderie that he had always kept at arm's length before. Jake eyed the horse's hoof. "What happened?" "Throw a shoe." "And went lame," Darius confirmed. "Got stranded out near Eagle Pass for a few days." Mason's been wondering where you got to, Jake said. He's in the main house with the ledgers if you want to report in. Darius nodded, handing his horse off to a stable boy with instructions to check the hoof carefully. Then steeling himself, he headed for the main house. Mason Colton was a man who wore authority as comfortably as his well-worn boots. In his 50s, with iron-gray hair and piercing blue eyes, he had built the C. Barty from nothing after the war, turning it into one of the most respected ranches in the territory. He looked up from his account books as Darius entered, one bushy eyebrow rising in question. "Thornton, beginning to think you'd run off with the horse." "No, sir," Darius said. He threw a shoe and went lame. "Had to hole up in Willow Creek while he healed." Mason grunted, making a note in his ledger. 3 days late for a thrown shoe. Something else happened I should know about. This was the moment Darius took a deep breath. "Yes, sir. Found a woman stranded in the desert on my way back. Her wagon had broken down and she was sick with fever. Her father had died and she was alone. I couldn't leave her there." Interest flickered in Mason's eyes. "That was decent of you." "She all right?" "Yes, sir, recovered well. She's staying in Willow Creek. They hired her as the school teacher." Mason set down his pen, studying Darius with those keen blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "And I'm guessing this young lady has something to do with why you're standing there looking like you've got something stuck in your craw." Darius shifted uncomfortably. "I'd like to request some time off, sir, 2 weeks if possible." "I know Roundup's coming, but—" "You sweet on this girl?" Mason interrupted bluntly. Heat rose to Darius's face. Yes, sir, I believe I am." To his surprise, Mason Colton threw back his head and laughed, a deep booming sound that filled the room. "Well, I'll be damned. Never thought I'd see the day Darius Thornton got himself tangled up with a woman. You've been like a ghost around here for 3 years, doing your job, keeping to yourself, turning down every invitation to town dances and socials." "This is different," Darius said quietly. "She's different." Mason's expression sobered, taking in the earnest intensity on his young employee's face. "Must be some woman to crack that shell you've built around yourself." He picked up his pen again, tapping it thoughtfully against the ledger. "Roundup's not for another month. You can have your 2 weeks starting tomorrow, but I'll need you back and fully committed when the real work starts." Relief washed over Darius. "Thank you, sir. I'll be back in time for Roundup, I promise." And after, Mason asked shrewdly, "What are your plans then, Thornton?" Darius hesitated. "I'm not entirely sure yet, sir. I thought I might look for more permanent possibilities in Willow Creek. After I fulfill my obligations here, of course." Mason nodded slowly. "I figured as much. Well, you're a good hand, Thornton, one of my best, but a man's got to follow his heart sometimes, even out here where it seems like there's no place for such things." He made another note in his ledger. "I'll have your pay ready in the morning, and a little extra for your trouble with that stranded lady. Seems like it's working out well for everyone." "Thank you, sir," Darius said, genuinely moved by the older man's understanding. Mason waved him away. "Go get some food and rest. You look like you've been rode hard and put away wet. And Thornton," he called as Darius reached the door, "I hope she's worth it." Darius turned back with a small smile. "She is, sir." "She definitely is." That night in the bunkhouse, surrounded by the familiar sounds of snoring men and creaking bunks, Darius stared at the ceiling and thought of Marianne. Was she settling into her room at Mrs. Wilson's hotel? Was she planning lessons for her new students? Did she think of him as often as he thought of her? 2 weeks suddenly seemed an eternity. But for the first time in his life, Darius Thornton had something to look forward to beyond mere survival. He had a purpose, a destination that was more than just the next job or the next paycheck. He had Marianne Harper, with her honey-blonde hair and clear green eyes, waiting for him in Willow Creek. The journey back seemed to take twice as long, though in reality, Darius made excellent time. With a fresh horse from the C. Barty remuda, provisions for the trail, and a small trunk containing all his worldly possessions, he rode toward Willow Creek with a sense of anticipation that both excited and terrified him. What if she had changed her mind? What if the intensity of their connection had been nothing more than the result of extraordinary circumstances? A desert rescue, a shared crisis, the intimacy forced by necessity. What if, in his absence, Marianne had settled into her new life and realized she didn't need a rough cowboy complicating things? These doubts plagued him as the familiar outlines of Willow Creek appeared on the horizon. The town looked much the same as when he had left it 2 weeks earlier, though he noticed a new sign hanging outside the schoolhouse. Willow Creek School, M. Harper, teacher. Darius rode directly to the hotel, his heart pounding in his chest. Mrs. Wilson looked up from her knitting as he entered, a knowing smile spreading across her face. "Well, well, the cowboy returns." She set aside her work and stood. "You're a man of your word, it seems." "Is she here?" Darius asked without preamble, removing his hat. Mrs. Wilson's smile widened. "At the schoolhouse. Classes just let out for the day. She'll be grading papers, I expect." Darius nodded his thanks and turned to go, but Mrs. Wilson's voice stopped him. "Young man, you might want to wash up first. You look like you've been on the trail for days." Looking down at his dusty clothes and feeling the grime of travel on his skin, Darius had to admit she had a point. "Could I trouble you for some hot water, ma'am?" 20 minutes later, freshly washed and wearing his one clean shirt, Darius walked the short distance to the schoolhouse. Through the window, he could see Marianne seated at her desk, her head bent over papers, a pencil tucked behind her ear. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching the golden highlights in her hair and casting a warm glow over the simple classroom. For a moment, Darius just watched her, struck by how right she looked in this setting. Marianne Harper had found her place in the world, a purpose that suited her gentle strength and determined spirit. The question that had haunted him on the ride back surfaced again. Did she still have room in that new life for a cowboy with nothing to offer but a heart he was only beginning to understand? Taking a deep breath, Darius knocked on the schoolhouse door. Marianne looked up, her expression changing from mild annoyance at the interruption to shock, then joy. She rose so quickly her chair nearly toppled backward. "Darius," she breathed, her voice carrying through the partially open door. He stepped inside, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands, his hat, his entire body. "Hello, Marianne." For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other across the schoolroom, as if each was trying to reconcile memory with reality. Then Marianne was moving toward him and Darius was closing the distance between them, and somehow she was in his arms, her face tilted up to his. "You came back," she whispered, her green eyes searching his face as if to memorize it. "I promised I would," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I know, but," she hesitated, "part of me was afraid you'd change your mind, that once you were back at the ranch, away from here, from me, you'd realize this was all a mistake." Darius brushed a stray strand of honey-blonde hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Marianne Harper, but this isn't one of them." And then he was kissing her or she was kissing him, it didn't matter which. All that mattered was the feel of her in his arms, the softness of her lips against his, the certainty that had grown inside him during their separation. This was where he belonged. When they finally parted, both breathless, Marianne rested her forehead against his chest. "I missed you," she admitted, "more than I should have, given how short a time we've known each other." "I missed you too," Darius said, surprised by how easily the words came. "The whole ride back, all I could think about was seeing you again." Marianne looked up at him, her expression turning serious. "And now that you're here, what happens next?" It was the same question they had left unanswered 2 weeks ago, but now Darius had an answer. During the long days at the C-Bar T, packing his few possessions and settling his affairs, he had thought of little else. "Now," he said, taking both her hands in his, "I ask if Willow Creek might have use for another resident. Someone who knows horses and cattle. Someone who might be able to start a small livery stable or work as a wrangler for the local ranches." Marianne's eyes widened. "You mean you want to stay here in Willow Creek?" "If that's all right with you," Darius said, suddenly uncertain. "I have to go back for roundup, I promised Mason, but after that I hoped." "Yes," Marianne interrupted, her face radiant with joy. "Yes, that would be more than all right with me." Relief and happiness surged through Darius. "I don't have much," he warned, "just my savings, my gear, and my horse. It might take time to establish myself here." "I don't need much," Marianne replied. "Just you." The simple statement, spoken with such certainty, filled Darius with a sense of wonder. All his life, he had believed attachment was weakness, that caring for someone meant giving them the power to destroy you. But standing here with Marianne, in this schoolroom that represented her dreams and courage, he understood at last what she had been trying to tell him from the beginning. Love wasn't weakness, it was strength. The kind of strength that could weather any hardship the frontier might throw at them, so long as they faced it together. "There's something else," Darius said, his heart racing, "something I need to tell you." Marianne looked at him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. What is it? Darius took a deep breath. I've spent most of my life believing that out here, attachment gets you killed, that the only way to survive is to depend on no one but yourself. He squeezed her hands gently. But you showed me there's another way to live, a better way. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the schoolhouse windows. It was a ring, simple but beautiful, with a small pearl set in silver. I can't offer you much in the way of comfort or security, he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart, but I can offer you this. I will never leave you to face life's challenges alone, the way you had to bury your father in the desert. I will stand beside you through whatever comes if you'll have me. Tears welled in Marianne's eyes as she looked from the ring to Darius's face. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Darius nodded, dropping to one knee before her. Marianne Harper, will you marry me? Yes, she whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. Yes, Darius Thornton, I will marry you. With hands that trembled slightly, Darius slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Rising to his feet, he gathered Marianne in his arms and kissed her again, pouring all the love and gratitude he felt into that single embrace. Outside the schoolhouse window, life in Willow Creek continued its usual rhythm, horses and wagons passing on the main street, children playing in the distance, the blacksmith's hammer ringing against his anvil. But inside, something miraculous had occurred. Two souls who had both known profound loss and loneliness had found in each other not just companionship, but home. When? Marianne asked when they finally broke apart. When will you have to leave for roundup? 3 days, Darius answered. I'll be gone for about a month and then I'm all yours. A mischievous smile curved Marianne's lips. 3 days isn't much time to plan a wedding. Darius blinked, catching her meaning. You want to marry before I leave, are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, she said firmly, unless you'd rather wait. No, Darius said quickly. No, I don't want to wait, but what about the town? What will people think of such haste? Marianne laughed, a sound of pure joy that made Darius's heart swell. Darius, this is the frontier. People understand that life is unpredictable and often short. Besides, Mrs. Wilson has been planning our wedding since the day you left. I think she already has the church reserved. Does she now? Darius said, unable to contain his own grin. Well, I wouldn't want to disappoint Mrs. Wilson. 2 days later, on a crisp autumn morning with the mountains rising majestic in the distance, Darius Thornton and Marianne Harper were married in the small church of Willow Creek. She wore a simple dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Wilson had helped her alter from her Sunday best, with wildflowers in her honey-blonde hair. He wore the only suit he owned, purchased hastily from the general store and tailored overnight by the town seamstress. The entire community turned out for the occasion. The children from Marianne's school, the town council members who had hired her, the blacksmith who had fixed their wagon wheel, and Mrs. Wilson beaming proudly in the front row as if she had personally arranged the match. When Darius spoke his vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish Marianne for all the days of his life, he did so with a clarity and certainty he had never felt before. The words were not just a promise but a declaration that the belief he had lived by for so long had been wrong. Attachment wasn't weakness. Love wasn't a liability. They were the very things that made life on the harsh frontier not just survivable but worth living. And when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Darius kissed his bride to the cheers and applause of their new community, he knew with unshakable conviction that he had found not just love, but home. The following day, as dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Darius prepared to ride back to the Sea Barty for the last time. His wife, stood on the porch of Mrs. Wilson's hotel where they had spent their wedding night in the room they had once shared as strangers. 1 month, he promised, gathering her clothes. Just 1 month and then I'll be back for good. Marianne nodded against his chest. I'll be waiting. Every day after school, I'll stand on this porch and look for you on the Eastern Trail. And I'll be thinking of you every minute I'm gone, Darius replied, tilting her face up for a kiss. Mrs. Thornton. The name brought a radiant smile to Marianne's face. Be safe, my love, come back to me. Wild horses couldn't keep me away, he assured her, kissing her once more before mounting his horse. As Darius Thornton rode east toward the Sea Barty for the final time, he marveled at the transformation of his life in the span of a few short weeks. He had ridden into the desert a solitary man, convinced that attachment was weakness and that true connection was impossible on the frontier. He rode away a husband, with a home and a community waiting for his return. The stranded cowboy who had rescued a woman from the desert had indeed been unprepared for the love that followed, a love that had not just changed his life, but saved it in ways he was only beginning to understand.